Folks, good to be talking to you again and seeing you out there. And before I go any further, let me tell you again, I'm Mike Newmeyer, and my number is 410 902 0464. 410 902 0464. And here's our little piece that we put into the money mailers. If you would like a free consultation and evaluation of your accounts and your plans for retirement, give us a call. And we're more than happy to help you with anything and everything financial that you like to talk about. I can give you general information about taxes. I'm not a tax person. I can give you general information about estate planning. I'm not an attorney. So, with those conditions understood, I'm more than happy to steer you in the right direction, give you general information, and refer you to professionals if you need some referrals. Okay? Very good. So that's that. Now, this little segment is called Things You Ought to Know. And I've got a few notes here based on questions that people have asked me when they've called me. So I thought, well, this is good. Let me share this with everybody out there that's following our podcast. Okay, remember how to find us. It's Mike Newmeyer, and you can find us on how many different platforms, Ms. Producer? 5 platforms, and those include YouTube, Facebook,
Instagram, Twitter,
LinkedIn, Twitter, and what did I miss? Anyway, you can find us. And if you can't find us, call us. And then we'll be more than happy to give you some direction on that one. But obviously you're watching me on one of those right now. We'll be there. And we don't get enough podcasts done. Sometimes we're just too busy to get them out. But we're going to do our best this year in 23 to be, better at it and get them more out on more topics. Okay, so this is a little segment called Things You Ought to Know, which I will be happy to broadcast from time to time when I make a list of things that I think, should be of common interest. Okay, think about this one. Your mutual funds, for people who have mutual funds. And you look at the results at the end of the year, and sometimes it's misleading. How is that? Because the regulators require, the mutual funds to always compare themselves to an index. So small cap funds would compare themselves to small cap index, and so forth. Large growth funds would compare themselves to the S&P 500. Okay, now what if they want it to look better than it is? Then they might compare themselves to another index. They may use a different index to compare themselves with to dress up their results and mislead people. And I've had people through the years tell me, oh, this fund was blah, blah, blah. And then it turns out that they had changed the index they were comparing themselves to. That's not good practice. But it does go on. So, you need to know if you're basing your results and your ideas on information, make sure that information is correct. One easy way to get the real answers is go to Morningstar. So go to Morningstar.com and look at their website, and you'll see some of their areas that will take you to funds and give you the real indexes they're being compared to. And you can look at the results that you're getting from them and compare what they're supposed to be doing. And then you'll know if there's any integrity, in their information. Okay, so that's one thing that you ought to be aware of. And then these are all not necessarily related. People ask me, what if I leave jewelry in my estate? How is that going to be evaluated? My answer is really simple. Don't leave jewelry in your estate. Sell it, or give it away. When you anticipate it's time to do those things, find a jeweler that buys legacy jewelry. Okay? The first thing I want to ask him is, are you an AEG designated jeweler? Okay, and that's a designation that says that they're operating with a high degree of integrity. That's a group that basically is based on ethics and so forth. So you want to ask them, what designations do you have? And that's what you're looking for, is that designation. And so that's something you want to keep in mind. Now and then go ahead and have them clean the jewelry, and then you can have a different jeweler if you want to, and then have them evaluated. And if you want to, you can do it get a second opinion, but that is the best way. Use your common sense. Don't leave them in your legacy. Don't leave them in your estate. You could have some tax problems that you're leaving for other people. You're better off to sell them, and if you want to give the money away, give the money away each year. Talk to your tax person about what the limitations are for giving money as gifts. Okay, so that's just an idea that you ought to be aware of. And then how about orphan accounts? Do you know what orphan accounts are? Do you realize that about something like $13 billion in the United States is sitting in orphan accounts? That means money is sitting in banks and so forth that have been left there and not claimed and not attended to in quite some time. Those are orphan accounts. Now that money can be disposed of after it's sat there long enough. What you want to do, how do you find out if there's orphan accounts that you might be entitled to? Well, let's say hypothetically that you were the beneficiary in a will of a list of things plus any other outstanding accounts. Well, you can run a scan. You can find out if there's any accounts out there. You can go to an accountant, ask them how to do it. A search can be done. It's just like if you go bankrupt, they do a scan, they find any account that your name is on. Now, what you would do is you run a scan and find out any account that has your father, uncle, whoever it was that you think left you money, and let them scan it and see if there's anything there. And then if you have a proper claim, that money will be made available to you. So orphan accounts are very important. That also happens with 401ks. I had a lady come to me many years ago now, and she came here to represent her mother. She had a durable power of attorney, so I could talk to her about her mother's accounts. And she said, my mother needs money very badly, and we're trying to find any source that we could find money for. Well, I didn't have any accounts left with her, but she said, my father worked in Chicago for a long time and was a union member, but we never saw anything of the money that he had in his 401k or in another plan. We're not sure, but we used to talk about it. But he passed away in Chicago a long time ago, and we don't know how to get that money. So I got on the telephone. I called the Secretary of State in Illinois, and 2 weeks later, we were able to put a claim in, and we found a great deal of money sitting in an old account that was orphaned. So there's orphaned accounts in all kinds of places, in all kinds of instruments. So you should be aware of that. And maybe it'll strike a nerve, and you'll realize that there's a possibility, and you're entitled to. Okay, be very, very cautious about scams. There's scams out there that tell you that you've inherited money in Poland or you've inherited money someplace else. Now, it could be legitimate, but the problem is you don't know if it's legitimate or not, and you're giving away personal information. Okay, that's the problem. Then they can hack you, and they can, if they get enough information about you, they can do you a lot of damage. So you have to be very careful the way you approach this. Sometimes working with an estate attorney who's able to, study the situation and advise you properly. Well, it costs a little money to do that, but think about the other side of it. What if you're being scammed and you lose a lot of money in the scam? If you deal with an estate attorney, you can say, what is it going to cost me for you to do a search on this? And you can limit your overall costs. And speaking of limiting our overall costs, let me tell you a story. Do you know that you can negotiate, with your internet supplier, telephone, computers, all that kind of stuff, all your internet supplying for your telephone and your computers and your television and everything else, you can negotiate that. So if you're working with a company, I won't name any, but you know who they are. You can sit down if you see your costs going up and so forth and so on, and you can negotiate a fixed cost, believe it or not. But you have to be willing to negotiate. So there's something to think about. We're all dealing with increased costs this year, and that's one way that you can approach it. Same thing in heating. If you find that if you're in oil, as an example, there is a little bit of wiggle room that oil suppliers, for heating are able to negotiate with. And the squeaky wheel gets the grease. If you negotiate, you're better off than if you don't negotiate. And if you're afraid of those big bills coming where they fill your tank, then negotiate a monthly payment, and that'll make life easier for you as far as cash flow is concerned. But you can negotiate the total cost, especially if you're a relatively large user. If you're a home delivery and most of everybody else is not on oil around you, and they need it, they need the business. Or even if everybody in the block is on oil, then that's easier for them to negotiate because they're making a lot of stops in that area, which means their overall costs are less as far as labor is concerned. So there's things to do, and those things can save you money. In days like this, we need to save money. Okay, and then let's see, orphan accounts sometimes. Okay, another thing you want to do, talking about orphan accounts. What if someone passes away in your family and you don't know where all of the money, where all the accounts are? So we supply this book to our clients where they record, and we help them record all of their accounts. And you'd be absolutely amazed. 3 months after this has been completed, they'll call me and say, you know what, I forgot about this account and we need to list that. Okay, great. So the point is that over time, you collect all your accounts and you list them in here: life insurance, bank accounts, if it's a money market account, stocks, bonds, anything and everything that's of value, deeds. You're not going to put the deed in here, but you can record in here that exists and so forth, and where the deed and where it's actually stored, all kinds of things like that. And remember this too, that there's a thing called a life estate deed, since I mentioned deeds. And a life estate deed, let's say you're going to give your house to one or more of your children. You can name them without putting them on your deed. Now, they have no right to sell it or anything else, but you can do a life estate deed, which means that it will pass to them upon your death, and that means it won't have to go through probate. That's a great time saver and so forth. So you can do that. There's lots of things that you can do that can bypass probate. Any transfer on death account, anything like that, transfer on death is absolutely, it's a bulletproof way, okay, to avoid probate through what they call through operation of law. So be aware of that. The other thing is gifting. Now you have to check the limits on gifting, but you can gift things, before you anticipate passing or you want it done by a certain time. You can gift. Look at the yearly limitations. Look at the total limitations in Maryland and in the Fed, and see what you're able to gift, and then you can make a decision on whether you want to do it. Okay? A lot of people have put their IRAs in a trust set up on a sequential distribution plan where the inheritees, your beneficiaries will receive money from those IRAs over a period of time. The problem with that is that back in 2006, a law was passed called the Secure Act. So unless you're really talking about your spouse inheriting your IRA, in most cases, now there's some exceptions, but in most cases, other beneficiaries have to take the money out over a 10-year period. And if you have set up a sequence distribution for 15 years or whatever it is, then they could be facing some tax consequences and some penalty consequences. So if you have a trust for distributing IRAs, take a look at it, ask your estate attorney, maybe it's time to update it and make changes on it. Okay, so that's something you want to know. All right, and then let's see if there's anything else. Incidentally, on the negotiating thing, you can also negotiate to limit your water bill. If you're in some parts of Baltimore County and every other county in Maryland, they may or may not be really taking accurate, measurements of your consumption of water. Yeah, so you suspect something, negotiate it. Go down to the Department of Public Utilities and negotiate it. And you may very well find, or the water department, and you may very well find that you're able to limit the bill and negotiate it. I have heard of situations where they claimed they were taking the reading every month and they hadn't taken a reading in 3 years. In fact, they didn't even know where the meter was. So don't just trust what is told you. You got to inspect it. It's fine to trust, but you got to inspect. Okay, so those are just some tips for today. And I will bring miscellaneous tips to you from time to time, and under things you ought to know. So that's it for today, and thank you very much for watching.